Hello everybody, I am Tom and you are watching me play Destiny 2. So, they've just released the insider scoop on Arc 3.0 on Bungie's website. I say just, they did it 10 hours ago, but I was asleep because, you know, Australian times. But I've woken up and here it is. So, I haven't read this yet, so I'm going to read this live. I'm just going to read it verbatim. There'll be a link to the actual, I was going to say TWAB, it's not a TWAB. There'll be a link to the article in the description. But I'm going to read this live. We'll do it a reaction to it. Fuck it, we'll do it live. Alright, so, bring the thunder inside Arc 3.0, Destiny Dev Team. Like the inevitable lightning that follows storm clouds, Arc 3.0's time has finally arrived. In 2022, the original trio of elemental subclasses that power Guardians in Destiny 2 have been undergoing a major overhaul. Void was the first subclass to get the 3.0 treatment, with the launch of Witch Queen expansion, Season of the Haunted welcomes Solar 3.0, and soon it will be time for Arc Wielders to receive their upgrades. The Destiny 2 development team has been hard at work on this subclass revamp, making sure that the new version of the Arc subclass brings the thunder. Having led subclass redesigns with Solar and Void, the team has spent a great deal of time zeroing in on essence of what a subclass revamp is all about, making sure that every aspect of gameplay and every ability and feature fits into the player fantasy. To get there, it all starts with inspiration. Arc is really just go fast and hit stuff, said Destiny designer Sam Dunn when asked about the core fantasy that powered the Arc 3.0 revamp. We call it the whole W subclass. Everything is built around moving forward and enabling aggression and those abilities. Cool. Powering the high-speed, high-impact goal, one of the prime inspirations of Arc 3.0 was the 2019 action movie Crank 2 High Voltage. Really interesting. The madcap action flick stars Jason Statham as the exit man, who has had his heart stolen and replaced with a battery. To stay alive, Statham must keep his body electrically charged in increasingly outrageous ways. It's non-stop, it's relentless, it's a great place to start for the fantasy the team wanted to achieve, namely ridiculously closing speed and maximum impact upon arrival. Crank, both the Crank movies are really freaking weird. They're hilarious. I don't know if they're supposed to be hilarious, but they're hilarious. We had a lot of ideas about, oh, you get this buff and then, much like Jason Statham's heart, you need to keep it ticking by staying in the fight, said Destiny designer Mike Hummelt. As the design evolved, we strayed away a bit from that just because it's hard to achieve that in gameplay of Destiny, but you're deleting 75 monsters in a room and then running through a hallway, but that was the emotional fantasy they wanted to go for, very much like living on the edge. Those Guardians who have spent some time with the revamped versions of Solar and Void, or with Stathis for that matter, know the basics of where we want to begin with Arc 3.0. As with those other subclasses, Arc 3.0 will give players more flexibility over customizing their Guardians' powers to suit their playstyle, through the introduction of aspects and fragments. In addition, new and returning class and melee abilities have been built or refactored for the modern Destiny 2 sandbox, making the subclass more powerful than ever. Lighting up new abilities. Before we dive into the class-specific Arc abilities, let's talk about the buffs and debuffs that are key to the Arc 3.0 experience. First up is the new buff, Amplified, which is key to the Arc 3.0 experience. An Amplified Guardian is faster, both in terms of movement speed and in terms of their weapon handling, and more agile, able to perform long slides that can function as a devastating setup for some of the attacks that follow. Unlike other damage-type buffs, Void's Invisibility or Solar's Radiant, players don't need to equip any specific aspects or fragments to become amplified. By default, all Arc classes become amplified after rapidly defeating targets with any Arc damage. Ooh, Trinity Ghoul. The equipped aspects and fragments offer additional ways to become or benefit from being amplified. Okay. After sprinting for a few seconds, an Amplified Guardian will gain another boost in speed, as designer Mark Hummel put it, basically as fast as we can make our sprint animation go. Really? Cool. Gaining a sizable PvE damage resistance buff and enabling an ever longer slide ability. Imagine full-on Metroid speed boost, only Samus is now wielding Gjallarhorn. Cool. Even if a player is no longer amplified, as long as they keep sprinting, their speed booster buff will stay active. Interesting. So you don't lose speed if you lose the buff. As long as you keep running, you'll keep the buff. That's good, actually. The amount of difference that will make it feel, I think, is huge. It's not something I even considered, but yeah, that will make a big difference. In development, Speed Booster probably took the longest for me to get on board with, in that you have already moving faster to begin with, said Hummel, when asked about the process of developing and refining the verbs of Arc 3.0. Adding PvE damage resistance to Speed Booster to cement it as a strong gap-closing tool and seeing it being used to move from one cover to the next in playtesting really brought it all together for me. You start sprinting and then you hear this audio swell start to come up, and then you're like just jet engine rocketing around the arena. It's awesome. On the debuff side, Arc 3.0 is bringing two to the party, Blind and Jolt. Blinded opponents in PvE won't be able to see, naturally, and will also be disoriented and unable to fire their weapons. In PvP, blinded opponents will have their screen widened out and their HUD removed for a short period of time alongside a distorted, washed out audio effect. So we already have this effect, by the way, like blinding grenades do this right now. So it's essentially the same effect, only you're going to be able to do it with abilities more easily. And jolted opponents who are damaged will periodically send slivers of chain lightning out to nearby enemies, damaging them in the process. We also have this to a lesser extent on a few weapons. Arc 3.0 also democratizes ionic traces, which were previously available only to middle tree warlocks. Now available to all, traces are objects that, when collected, will add energy to all of your abilities. Now that you're familiar with the basics, let's jump into the classes themselves and see how they'll be making the most of Arc 3.0. Hunter. A hunter dashing forward, crackling with the power of arc lightning, is a sight that is sure to strike fear in the heart of any enemy. As with previous subclass revamps, the team had definite images in mind when considering what the new arc should feel like in combat. For Hunter, the team imagined the graceful warrior monk, giving the hunter the ability to get in close quarters quickly and effectively, making a mess of their opponents in the process. For Hunters, we wanted to reward staying in close and being safe while you're in close quarters with an enemy, which is very difficult to do with a lot of our content, indeed. We wanted to give them tools to stay alive while they either closed the gap or were in a melee combo. That came primarily in the form of giving them crowd control tools. Interesting. To that end, Hunter's Arc Staff Super is returning with Arc Staff. Hunters will be able to block and deflect projectiles with the press of a button, as well as perform an armored dodge, where upon dodging, the hunter is more resilient to incoming damage. Okay, so they've moved all of the supers into one Arc Staff Super. Cool. I assume they're getting another super, maybe? Yeah, there we go. One super just didn't seem like enough for the team, thus the introduction of a brand new Arc-themed super, the Gathering Storm. Here, the hunter leaps into the air, hurls their staff into the ground, or into an unlucky enemy, like a spear. Upon impact, the staff emits a damaging burst that jolts nearby enemies. Soon after, a giant bolt of lightning strikes the staff and overcharges it, causing a large zone around it for several seconds. While overcharged, the staff sends out arcs of lightning to damage any nearby enemies that move near it. So this is exactly what I was expecting as another super. It's a burst super, essentially. So that's great. And Arc Staff is now all three trees of Arc Staff all pulled into one tree. So great. You can now do your Whirlwind Guard, and you can do your dodge. On the melee side, the team kept the Hunter's combination blow ability, feeling like it was right in line with the graceful warrior fantasy that we were going for. Kills with combination blow will refund dodge energy, increase melee damage, and restore a small amount of health, allowing skilled hunters to chain their dodges and melee attacks into ballistic bursts of beautiful fury. In addition, the disorienting blow melee returns, blinding opponents with a devastating palm attack, while also now amplifying the hunter along the way. Interesting. Hunters will be able to choose from 3 arc aspects to customize their tactical style. Flow state. Defeating a jolted opponent causes you to become amplified. When amplified, the hunter's dodge will recharge faster and makes you more resistant to damage, and you have quicker reload times. Interesting. Temper Strike allows the hunter to perform a sliding melee that launches the arc wave along the ground, dealing significant damage and dodging enemies in its path. So this used to be the melee of Middle Tree, I think? I think this was Middle Tree melee, so it's now a aspect. Makes sense. Lethal Current. After dodging, the hunter's melee lunge range is increased, and the next melee attack jolts the target and creates a damaging lightning aftershock. When used with the Arc Staff Super, after dodging, the hunter's next light attack hits twice. In addition, hitting a jolted enemy with a melee attack will blind them. Interesting. Finally, and of particular note, Arc 3.0 will also bring back the Blink movement mode for Arc Hunters. In fact, the Blink ability will also include a baseline buff to any class that has access to it, looking at you, Void Warlocks. So they're buffing Blink, and they're giving it back to Arc Hunters. Cool. I said back to Arc Hunters had it in Destiny 1. They could Blink. Blink hasn't really been touched since Destiny 2's release, and never quite reached the heights of its previous reign of terror, Humboldt said. We felt like it was a good time to walk a few of the tuning changes back a little and bring Blink's potency at baseline up without needing an exotic equipped. Perfect. In practical terms, that means an increased travel distance and a reworked recharge model for the ability, and will keep it fresh while still maintaining its effectiveness. It's interesting. I wonder if that means they're going to change. There is a Warlock exotic head that makes Blink better. What's it called? Astrocyte Verse. I wonder if they're gonna change Astrocyte Verse. They're gonna have to, right? Warlock. Player fantasies don't come any more vivid than what the team had in mind for Arc 3.0 Warlocks. Two separate images were at the top of mind: the Lightning Shaman and Emperor Palpatine, in full Lightning Finger mode while turning Luke into a burnt toast. Yeah, okay. We wanted the player to feel like they were channeling the power of the storm through their body, said Dunn, controlling the storm, controlling lightning like an elemental conduit. Two supers will be available for Warlock: Chaos Reach, where players will be able to shoot concentrated beams of arc energy out of their hand to decimate opponents, and Storm Trance, which is more akin to the image of Palpatine floating around the world firing lightning from his fingers. This super combines both the landfall behavior from the previous bottom tier arc, creating a damaging shockwave underneath the player, and the ionic blink behavior of the old top tree arc, allowing Warlocks to teleport briefly during the super. Perfect. So they seem to be doing what I expected, where they kind of merge the two trees and then the separate one stays separate. Warlocks will have two melees available, both utilizing the power of lightning. The ball lightning melee will send out a floating ball of arc energy that detonates, zapping enemies down from above, and chain lightning will send out arcs of lightning to strike and jolt the primary target and chain damage to surrounding enemies in the process. The Warlock's whole thing is that being amplified modifies their abilities. It powers them up, said Dunn. For ball lightning, if you're amplified, the arc ball will fly out and zap enemies 3 times instead of just the normal once. God damn. So you can get more damage out of it. Damn, 3 times? That's like a one-shot melee if you get someone in a corridor or something, right? In PvP? That seems insane. For chain lightning, it changes to more targets. More specifically, while normal chain lightning creates a single set of chains that bounce between a number of targets, when amplified, the ability creates 2 sets of chains and can potentially jump to twice the number of enemies. Okay. 3 aspects are available. Arc Soul. The Warlock casts a rift to create an Arc Soul that will assist the player in battle. Allies who pass through it, the rift will also earn the Arc Soul. The rift charges faster when allies are near, while amplified, any Arc Soul you have or gain is supercharged, increasing its rate of fire. Interesting. Lightning Surge. The Warlock activates their melee while sliding to transform into a ball of lightning and teleport forward, calling down a field of lightning bolts at the exit point that jolts targets. That's awesome. That's so cool. I love it. Electrostatic Mind. Arc ability kills and kills on arc debuffed enemies create ionic traces. When you collect any ionic traces, you become amplified. Okay, so that's very, very good. That's going to be... always have abilities up with that many arc traces, I think. And finally, we hit the big boy Titans. Titans haven't traditionally been known as paragons of mobility, but Arc 3.0, the team is shaking things up. The team had a couple of inspirations in mind with the Titan Arc revamp: the lead with your fists bare knuckle brawler, and the freight train. You don't get to move the Arc Titan, Humboldt said, they move you. The Arc Titan's ultimate goal is to punch you in the face, and do it a lot. And so a lot of what we did with Arc Titan was to try and figure out how to facilitate fist-to-face contact as much as possible. Desire to punch all the things manifests in a couple of devastating supers that are returning with Arc 3.0, Fist of Havoc and Thunder Crash. While the latter is practically unchanged from before, Fist of Havoc now has an adjusted slam radius that's halfway between top and bottom path. And the Grand Slam leaves a damaging field in its wake, while slamming from the air causes damaging AoE effects from the previous top tree behavior. Yeah, okay. So again, they've just combined the two roaming supers and they've left Thunder Crash alone. In the case of Thunder Crash and other abilities, uncoupling a subclass's ability from the old subclass diamond system will result in some substantial buffs depending on how players use it. It's one of the intrinsic advantages that the new subclass 3.0 system brings to Destiny. When you start pairing them with different things, even though nothing changed with the actual ability, they can end up being significantly stronger as a result, because now they aren't locked into a canned set of perks that surround them, Humboldt said. Thunder Crash is a great example of that. Yeah, okay. Another really good example of this, particularly with Titan actually, is the reason Titan felt so amazing on Solar 3.0 was because they allowed you to combine sunspots with a throwing hammer. So the throwing hammer is like your melee ability where you can throw a hammer and you can go pick it up again, so you have infinite melees essentially. Combining that with sunspots means that you can be healing and have the sunspot effect, as well as be able to throw your hammer infinitely, which creates more sunspots. So that's kind of what they're talking about here, I think, is the fact that they didn't want to buff Thunder Crash, because Thunder Crash, when you can use it with all the other things, is incredibly powerful. I mean, it was anyway, honestly. Thunder Crash with Quirus of the Fallen Star. It's a pretty staple for a very long time for boss damage. One of the biggest changes coming to Arc Titan is the new Thruster class ability. By double tapping a button while on the ground, the Titan bursts in their throttle direction at speed. Really. Performing a quick first-person evade comparable in distance to a hunter's dodge. Arc is a damage type that is about mobility, so if we're going to add a mobility booster anywhere for Titans, it's going to be here, said Humboldt. Interesting. So they've given Hunters like a... I was going to say an air dodge. It's not an air dodge. It's a ground dodge, specifically. Because it says specifically you have to be on the ground, right? Yeah, while on the ground. Cool. For melee attacks, Titans will retain the Seismic Strike Shoulder Charge, which blinds enemies. Your Seismic Strike, while amplified, will increase the radius of the blind, and the blinding effect will last longer. Interesting. And Ballistic Slam also returns, where players can slam the ground after sprinting in the air, creating a damaging explosion upon impact. Cool. Those returning melees will be joined by a brand new charged attack known as Thunderclap. Here, the Titan player holds the melee button and charges up Arc Energy that can be unleashed in either a quick powerful jab or held and built up to be unleashed in a furious One-Punch-Man style blast that will devastate an opponent. The charge state cannot be stored, and the Titan must be on the ground to charge the punch. Interesting. The damage is significant. A 90% charged Thunderclap will one-shot Guardians in PvP, but that reward will be balanced by the time it will take to build up that charge level, and the fact you must remain stationary to charge, always a dangerous move in PvP. It's going from Hunters around the corner with a shotgun, now it's going to be Titans around the corner charging up a Thunderclap. That's going to be interesting. Like the other subclasses, Arc 3.0 Titans will have 3 aspects to select from. Touch of Thunder improves arc grenades in the following ways. Flashbang fires an additional blind impulse on its first bounce. Pulse, when the grenade damages an enemy, it creates an ionic trace for the Titan. Pulse grenade's damage increases over time as the grenade lingers after impact. Lightning Grenade grants an additional charge for Lightning Grenade and jolts targets on initial blast. That's going to be interesting. 2 Lightning Grenades? Damn. And Storm Grenades create a roaming storm cloud that moves and tracks enemies, similar to the Stasis Hunter's Silence and Squall, firing lightning bolts onto the ground underneath it. That's awesome! Cool. And then we have the Juggernaut aspect. While sprinting and with full class ability energy, the Titan gains a frontal shield that blocks incoming damage. When amplified, the shield is stronger. Once the shield is depleted by taking damage, the player's class energy is depleted. And then we have Knockout. Melee kills trigger health regeneration and make the Titan amplified. Critically wounding an enemy or breaking their shield increases the melee range and damage for a brief period. Interesting. Titan's base melee becomes arc empowered while Knockout is active. That's interesting. To complement the class specific aspects, Arc 3.0 will also introduce a suite of new fragments, which offer new perks to build upon as well as add bonuses or penalties to your Guardian's intrinsic stats. Here's a look at a few of the fragments to come. Spark of Beacons. When the player is amplified, Arc special weapon kills create a blinding explosion. Interesting. Spark of Resistance. When surrounded by enemies, the player has increased damage resistance. Interesting. I wonder how much damage resistance that is. Spark of Momentum. Sliding over ammo will reload your weapon and grant a small amount of melee energy. Sliding over heavy ammo increases the amount of energy granted. Cool. And Spark of Shock. The player's arc grenades jolt enemies. In all, the changes that are coming in Arc 3.0 will give Guardians more ways to bring the pain to the enemies of humanity, while also letting players customize the Guardians in the way they want to play. Fans will have their first chance to see Arc 3.0 in action during next week's Destiny 2 Showcase, which is coming on August 23rd, starting at 9 AM Pacific. Check out the Showcase reveal page to learn more. Okay, well that's a lot of information. That's really, really cool. Oh, I love it. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video. If you liked the video, please leave a like. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Oh, they've got me hyped for Arc now. Gonna have to get Arc weapons out of my vault. I mean, I say that like I already haven't. I have. Anyway, see you next time, guys.